Welcome. Today we will describe the ways single case design research is incorporated in Works Clearinghouse intervention reports. The Works Clearinghouse, or WWC, recently released two intervention reports that include findings from single case design studies. These reports, which were conducted under version 4.1 WWC standards, focus on good behavior game and on class-wide function-related intervention teams, or CW-FIT for short. Single case designs are an important tool for understanding the effectiveness of education interventions, and this webinar will help researchers understand how the WWC reviews and synthesizes single case design research. I'm Dr. Martha Bleeker, a principal researcher at Mathematica, and I will be joined today by Dr. John Hitchcock, an associate director at Westat. John and I have worked together for several years to review single case design research under WWC standards and to synthesize those findings in WWC intervention reports. Today, we'll start with a quick overview of the WWC and its products. Then we will discuss how single case design research can be used to expand the base of rigorous studies that WWC reviews. And then we'll provide information to help you understand single case design research and how single case design findings contribute to WWC intervention reports. We'll wrap up the presentation by sharing where you can find the materials that we described today. The WWC was established by the Institute of Education Sciences as a central and trusted source of scientific evidence for what works in education. The WWC reviews existing research on educational topics and summarizes that evidence in accessible products for researchers, educators, and other policymakers. Hundreds of trained and certified reviewers rate whether studies are of sufficiently high quality and then summarize the results from those high quality studies. The goal is to provide educators and other policymakers with information to make evidence-informed decisions. The WWC develops several types of resources. Individual study reviews provide the ingredients for WWC products and show how the WWC rates the quality of each study. Although individual study reviews can also support evidence-based decision-making, findings from one study may not represent all that is known about the effectiveness of an intervention practice. More comprehensive summaries of evidence are found in intervention reports and in practice guides. Intervention reports help schools, districts, and educators to select evidence-based interventions. Audiences can use these reports when deciding, for example, whether to adopt a specific program or curriculum for their school. Intervention reports summarize all high-quality, publicly available research on a specific intervention and also discuss the costs and the implementation of that intervention. We'll be discussing two intervention reports during our presentation today. Practice guides provide educators with actionable recommendations on how to apply evidence-based instructional practices and how to address challenges in their classrooms and schools. Practice guides include examples that are ready to use in the classroom. All WWC resources are free and available on the WWC website. On the WWC's landing webpage, which is shown here, you can easily access practice guides, intervention reports, individual study reviews, and downloadable data from study reviews. Next, we will talk about the ways single case design, or SCD, research can help expand the evidence base of research reviewed by the WWC. Group design studies are commonly used to generate evidence of effectiveness in WWC products. These include randomized controlled trials, quasi-experimental designs, as well as regression discontinuity designs. When conducting group design research, researchers compare the study participants who are receiving the intervention to a comparison group of participants who do not receive the intervention during the study period. Group design research can use large samples, such as all students within a class, school, or district, which can be costly, especially if students are spread out across several locations or if data are collected over a long period of time. Some populations, interventions, and outcomes are not well suited to group design studies. such as interventions aimed at students with specific challenges who are found in small samples. For example, students struggling with serious behavior problems or students with specific learning challenges. Group design studies may also not be feasible when all students or study participants need to receive the intervention during the study. Again, this could be true for students who have behavioral or learning challenges and need extra support during the study period. Group design studies might also not be the best fit when researchers want to measure outcomes such as student behavior, which are best studied via direct observation and repeated measurements, because it can be costly to collect, process, and analyze these data with large group design samples. SCD research can be used to help overcome some of these challenges. SCDs are experimental designs, but instead of comparing outcomes for 2 or more groups of participants, in SCDs, researchers assess intervention effects for individual cases by repeatedly observing the same case in different study phases, including with and without the intervention. So an individual case is the unit of intervention administration and data analysis. A case is often a single student or a group of students, such as a classroom. A case could also be a teacher or a school. Outcome data measured for the case during the intervention condition are compared to outcome data measured for the case during sessions without the intervention. Researchers generally present the study data graphically to illustrate the effect of the intervention by showing how outcomes change within and across the different study conditions. There are many variations of single case designs, and we'll walk through the most common types on the next several slides. Here's an example of a reversal-withdrawal design where an intervention is repeatedly introduced and withdrawn to one case across multiple phases while researchers measure the outcome of interest. The case in this single case design shown here is one classroom. Works Clearinghouse standards require that single case designs have at least 3 opportunities to demonstrate an effect of the intervention in at least 3 points in time. This replication makes common threats to internal validity less plausible. The reversal-withdrawal design shown here meets this requirement because there are 3 phase changes, each providing an opportunity to demonstrate the effect of either adding or removing good behavior game from the classroom. This single case design started with 5 baseline observations. Each data point in the baseline phase represents one classroom session where observers measured the classroom's on-task behavior. After the baseline phase, the researchers worked with the teacher to begin good behavior game starting in session 6 and continued using good behavior game through session 10, while observers measured student behavior. The teacher then withdrew the good behavior game for 5 sessions before reintroducing good behavior game again in session 16. Intervention effects are based on the changes in outcomes that occur with a systematic and repeated introduction and withdrawal of the intervention. These designs are appropriate when researchers expect effects on outcomes to reverse when the intervention is removed. In this example shown here, the data appear to suggest that good behavior game led to an increase in on-task behavior compared to the baseline and withdrawal sessions when good behavior game was not used with the students. Another common type of single case design is called a multiple baseline design. In this type of SCD, the researcher staggers the introduction of the intervention across several cases or settings. In the example shown here, each case or classroom provides one opportunity to demonstrate an effect of the good behavior game. All of the classrooms started in the baseline sessions at the same time, and the researcher then staggered the introduction of the good behavior game in each class to provide 3 opportunities to demonstrate an effect of good behavior game at 3 different points in time. Intervention effects are based on any observed changes in outcome measurements that occur with the systematic, staggered, and repeated introduction of the intervention across the cases. In this example, the percentage of time that students exhibited disruptive behavior decreased with the introduction of good behavior game in each class. Multiple baseline designs are types of SCDs that are appropriate when the intervention is expected to have a lasting effect on outcomes. The single case design studies of the good behavior game and of CW Fit that we reviewed for the recent intervention reports mostly use reversal withdrawal designs and multiple baseline designs.
Thanks, Martha. Another type of single case design, called the multiple probe design, is very similar to a multiple baseline design. But multiple probes use intermittent data collection rather than continuous data collection in each phase. As shown in this example, the researchers did not collect data in each of the baseline sessions for all of the students. These missing data are a planned feature of this kind of single case design. This design is often used if repeated testing of a behavior or skill may be too costly, impractical, or harmful, or even upsetting to participants. For example, in this single case design shown here, it could be frustrating to keep testing the students before they receive the intervention if they are not expected to correctly answer questions on a test prior to receiving the intervention. Another type of single case design, called an alternating treatment design, is used when a researcher wants to compare the effect of two or more different interventions. These designs use a rapid alteration between interventions and usually include fewer total observations or sessions as compared to other kinds of single case designs. They may also be used to compare different interventions or test differential effects of multiple variations of the same intervention. In the example here, the researcher is comparing the effect of a classroom management intervention to a function-based intervention on the percentage of time a student is observed to be on task. The data suggest that the function-based intervention is more effective at keeping the student engaged in on-task behavior. As we mentioned earlier, single case design research can be used to help overcome some of the challenges with group design research. Single case designs do not require large samples or random assignment, so can be used with smaller numbers of participants, such as a few students with high levels of disruptive behavior or a small group of students with disabilities. In single case design research, all participants can receive the intervention during the study period. Researchers do not need to withhold services to establish a control group. This means a researcher can use a single case design to measure the effectiveness of an intervention with all students who need support in the same period of time. There are several requirements for single case designs to meet WWC standards. As we mentioned earlier, single case designs must include repeated measurements across conditions with 3 attempts to demonstrate an intervention effect at 3 different points in time. This repetition of outcome measurement improves precision of results. Single case designs are experimental designs that can demonstrate causal effects as long as researchers control when the intervention is introduced and as long as they carefully monitor outcomes in both the presence and absence of the intervention. Outcomes based on observational data, which are common in single case designs, must be measured systematically over time by more than one assessor and meet specific inter-assessor agreement criteria set by the WWC. One is the percent agreement across observers must be 80%, and inter-assessor agreement data must be collected at least once in each phase of the single case design and in at least 20% of intervention and comparison sessions. These requirements reduce threats to internal validity and make it more reasonable to infer that observed effects were caused by the intervention. Studies that do not meet these requirements do not meet WWC standards and are not included in WWC intervention reports. This slide describes the 2 most common reasons why single case design studies do not meet WWC single case design standards in the good behavior game and CW Fit research. The first is that eligible outcomes did not meet inter-assessor agreement requirements. This happens when inter-assessor agreement data are not collected at least once in each phase or in at least 20% of intervention and comparison sessions, or when the percent agreement across observers is less than 80%. Among the group of studies that did not meet standards, 52% of studies in the good behavior game and CW-fit interventions did not meet standards for this reason. The second most common reason a single case design does not meet standards in these two intervention reports is because there were insufficient data to demonstrate an intervention effect. This happens when there are fewer than 3 attempts to demonstrate an intervention effect at 3 different points in time. So for example, a reversal-withdrawal design with just 3 phases was conducted instead of with 4 phases. Studies also do not meet standards when there are fewer than 3 data points and at least 1 phase of the single case design. Among the studies that did not meet standards, 48% of studies in the Good Behavior Game Intervention Report and CW Fit Report did not meet standards for this reason. Now that we have described the most common types of single case designs and how they are assessed against WWC standards, we will now talk about how the WWC reports findings from single case design studies that do meet standards. In a WWC intervention report, single case design evidence can be synthesized with findings from group design studies. The WWC calculates a design comparable effect size from single case designs and synthesizes it with Hedges G effect sizes calculated from group design studies. The design comparable effect size is conceptually similar to Hedges G. The design comparable effect size is estimated by comparing outcomes between intervention and comparison phases. It accounts for trends and repeated measures of the outcome over the sessions. Calculating a design comparable effect size requires 3 or more cases in the study, all with data on the same outcome. This means a design comparable effect size may be estimated from a multiple baseline design or multiple probe design across at least 3 cases or across reversal-withdrawal designs for 3 cases. There is currently no procedure for computing the design comparable effect size for other types of single case designs, such as alternating treatment designs. There are some special considerations to keep in mind when calculating a design comparable effect size for outcomes measured for groups of individuals, such as when the case is a classroom or small group. The WWC will calculate a design comparable effect size for cluster level outcomes if they are based on measurements of individual outcomes aggregated to the group level. For example, the WWC will calculate a design comparable effect size when an outcome is based on the percentage of students in a class exhibiting disruptive behavior, so long as each student's behavior was systematically observed. However, version 4.1 of the WWC Procedures Handbook does not describe procedures for calculating design comparable effect sizes for cluster outcomes. So, the WWC applies a formula from version 5.0 of the Procedures and Standards Handbook to transform the effect size to measure effects on students instead of classrooms. We applied the cluster correction and transformation for some cluster level outcomes in the Good Behavior Game Intervention Report. This was, however, not necessary for the CW Fit Intervention Report. The WWC cannot calculate a design comparable effect size for cluster level outcomes if measurements are based on scans of the cluster without a fixed method for individually observing each student in the cluster. So for example, if the observer scans the entire classroom at once, but does not systematically observe each student, the WWC will not calculate a design comparable effect size. In addition, the WWC cannot calculate a design comparable effect size for measurements based on small groups of students within the cluster instead of individual students. Both the Good Behavior Game and CW Fit had cluster-level outcomes for which we could not calculate a design comparable effect size. The WWC estimates a design comparable effect size using a multi-level modeling framework. Software products to implement the design comparable effect size estimation include the SCD HLMR package or web application. These calculations require access to raw outcome data by case, observations session, and study condition. If authors do not report raw single case design data or provide them through an author query, the WWC extracts the data from the graphs included in the publication using freely available software. When synthesizing effect sizes across studies, the WWC weights each impact estimate based on its precision, so more precise estimates receive more weight. The precision of a design comparable effect size is influenced by the number of cases, number of observation sessions, and consistency of measurements within phases. Use of repeated measures improves precision. The design comparable effect size can therefore contribute meaningfully to a synthesis even though sample sizes are generally much smaller than group design studies. Single case design studies without a design comparable effect size can still be described in WWC products, but are not synthesized with other intervention findings. Instead, the WWC summarizes authors' characterizations of findings based on their visual analysis, and we will demonstrate this point later in this presentation. The rest of the presentation will focus on two new WWC intervention reports focused on the Good Behavior Game and CW Fit.
Thanks, John. We will describe both interventions, including intervention components, how each was implemented, and the costs of each program. We will also describe the number of studies in each report and the students represented in those studies. And then we will briefly summarize the effectiveness of Good Behavior Game and CW Fit across studies and outcome domains, including findings from both group design and single case design studies. We will start with Good Behavior Game. Good Behavior Game is a classroom management strategy that aims to help teachers create a positive learning environment by decreasing student disruptive behavior and improving student academic engagement and pro-social behaviors. Schools can use the PACS Good Behavior Game, the American Institutes for Research or AIR version of Good Behavior Game, or they can use their own adaptation of Good Behavior Game materials. Each version that we saw used in the Good Behavior Game research that we reviewed had similar components. Good Behavior Game was developed for use with students in pre-K through grade 12, and it's often used with students or classrooms that are demonstrating high levels of disruptive behaviors. Teachers place students into teams, and then they reward them for demonstrating appropriate behaviors and following classroom rules. Teachers can receive training from a developer or a researcher. The PACS Good Behavior Game and the AIR versions both provide an initial 2-day training for teachers, as well as other materials. Among the studies that we reviewed and included in the Good Behavior Game intervention report, 4 studies used the PACS Good Behavior Game, 1 study used the AIR version, and 11 studies did not report which approach was used, but implementation of the program was similar across all of these studies. The intervention report contains a rich description of Good Behavior Game and describes how the studies implemented key components, which include a team-based game, training for teachers, and ongoing coaching for teachers. Before starting the Good Behavior Game, teachers divide their students into teams. Teachers also develop Good Behavior Game rules for student behavior, which often include staying seated and on task, following directions, being polite to other students, and ignoring distractions. Before starting the game, teachers describe these rules and display them on a poster in the classroom for students to see. Teachers then start the game and they monitor student behavior during the game and score teams based on how well students follow the rules. Teachers decide how many points teams need to win the game, and then they announce which team or teams won at the end of the session. In all 16 studies included in the What Works Clearinghouse intervention report, teachers provided students on the winning teams a reward, such as snacks, school supplies, stickers, or free time. The intervention report also describes the resources needed to implement good behavior game, including the cost of teacher training, coach training, facilities and technology, and other materials such as the rewards for students. The total cost of purchasing training and materials from the PAX Good Behavior Game developer ranges from $405 to $580 per teacher. And the total cost of purchasing training and required materials from AIR is about $325 per teacher, plus travel for the trainers. For this intervention report, we identified 87 studies of good behavior game in our literature search. 16 of those studies met What Works Clearinghouse standards and contributed to the intervention report and the effectiveness ratings. This includes 6 group design studies and 10 single case design studies for which we could calculate a design comparable effect size. There were 15 other single case design studies that did not contribute to the findings because we could not calculate a design comparable effect size for any of the findings in these 15 studies. 14 of these studies did not have at least 3 cases, which is required to calculate a design comparable effect size, and 1 study used an alternating treatment design, which again is not eligible for design comparable effect size calculation. Even though the What Works Clearinghouse could not calculate a design comparable effect size for these 15 studies, we included the author's visual analysis of the findings in an appendix to the intervention report. These findings are not included in the main intervention report. There were also 15 studies that did not meet What Works Clearinghouse standards and 41 studies that were either ineligible to review or out of scope for this intervention report. Studies are typically ineligible for review because they do not include eligible outcomes or do not use an eligible study design, as described in the What Works Clearinghouse study review protocol in the standards handbook. And one reason that studies could be out of scope for our review is if they bundled good behavior game with another intervention. This slide describes characteristics of the sample that informed the good behavior game intervention report using student demographic information drawn from the published studies. Across the 16 studies that met WWC standards and contributed to the effectiveness ratings, there were over 8,000 students from several states in the United States, Northern Ireland, and the United Kingdom. Most of the students in the studies were white or Black, and most received a free and reduced price lunch. About 15% of students received special education services, and almost half of the students were female. One note here is that the WWC asks authors for non-reported sample information unless the data could allow readers to identify sample members. So for example, we usually do not request demographic data from authors of single case designs if they have small sample sizes. So what does the research say about the effectiveness of good behavior game? In the report, we describe effectiveness ratings for 8 different outcome domains shown on this slide here, including student behavior, teacher practice, several student achievement outcomes, as well as interpersonal competencies and school climate. In each outcome domain, the WWC synthesizes evidence across studies using a weighted average to determine the effectiveness rating for each outcome domain. When synthesizing findings across studies, the WWC accounts for each study's research design, whether findings were statistically significant and positive, and the number of studies contributing to the report for that domain. As shown here, there's strong evidence indicated by the evidence tier 1 tag that good behavior game improved outcomes in the student behavior domain. The WWC's assessment in this domain is based on 11 studies and over 6,000 students. The evidence tiers are aligned with the U.S. Department of Education's evidence definition. In particular, this intervention satisfies requirements for the evidence tier 1 tag and the student behavior domain because the WWC's effectiveness rating is positive effects, which is based on the strength of the research designs and the statistical significance of the average effect across all high quality research. It also receives the evidence tier 1 tag because the sample size for the domain exceeds the minimum criteria. There were at least 350 participants, and there were multiple educational sites that contributed to the findings. In this case, there were at least 2 educational sites or schools. For the teacher practice domain, there's promising evidence, indicated here by the evidence tier 3 tag. The good behavior game improved these outcomes. The WWC's assessment in this domain is based on 3 studies with 238 teachers. This domain received the evidence tier 3 tag because fewer than 350 teachers were included across the 3 studies that met standards. The research on writing conventions and writing productivity provides promising evidence that good behavior game improves outcomes based on 1 study with 6 students. These domains also received the evidence tier 3 tag because they included data from less than 350 students. The rest of the outcome domains had uncertain effects. This is because the average effect across these outcomes and studies was not statistically significant. The WWC does not assign an evidence tier for an outcome domain if the effectiveness rating is uncertain or if it's potentially negative or negative. The intervention report also provides outcome level findings in a series of tables sorted by outcome domain. These tables provide the outcome level effect sizes from group design studies and the outcome level design comparable effect sizes for the 10 single case design studies that contributed to the findings. This slide here includes a screenshot of the teacher practice findings from the good behavior game intervention report. The first study shown here by Humphrey et al. In 2018 was a group design study. So we've included the intervention and comparison means, along with the effect size, improvement index, and p-value. Note that the improvement index is just another measure of the intervention's impact on an outcome. The rest of the studies in this table are single case design studies. So we only report the effect size, in this case, the design comparable effect size, the improvement index, and the p-values. Means and standard deviations for the intervention and comparison groups are not displayed for findings from single case design studies because single case designs do not have a comparison group. Effect sizes for each outcome are coded such that a positive effect size indicates a positive outcome and a negative effect size indicates an unfavorable outcome. As we mentioned earlier, an appendix provides additional characteristics of the single case design studies of good behavior game that meet WWC's single case design standards. The appendix provides additional information about the 15 single case design studies that did not contribute to the findings because the WWC could not calculate a design comparable effect size for any of the outcomes in those studies. The appendix describes the study and sample characteristics and also the author's characterization of findings. The appendix also provides additional information about the 10 single case design studies that did contribute to the findings in the report, including more detailed information about the studies and sample characteristics, and a description of the author's characterization of findings based on outcomes for which a design comparable effect size could not be calculated. For example, there was one good behavior game study where the WWC calculated a design comparable effect size across 6 focal students, and where we reported on those findings in the intervention report. In the appendix, we also described the author's characterization of findings for 2 classroom level findings that were based on just 2 classrooms. WWC users can also access public extract data from each study. Now I will turn it back to John to describe CW-FIT.
Thanks, Martha. Class-wide function-related intervention teams, or CW-FIT, is a classroom management strategy that aims to help teachers create a positive learning environment by decreasing disruptive behavior among students and improving social skills and pro-social behaviors. The intervention was developed for use with students in pre-K through grade 12. CWFIT is often used with students or classrooms that are demonstrating high levels of disruptive behaviors. Teachers establish rules for their classroom and provide instruction on target social skills that students need to demonstrate to follow those rules. They then place students into teams, observe and score their behavior, and reward them for demonstrating the skills and following the rules. In terms of training, materials are available for free on the developer's website. Teachers can receive training from another staff member in their school or district, or from a CWFIT researcher or developer, or they can train themselves. Additional information about key intervention components, study implementation details, and CWFIT costs are included in the intervention report. The report describes key components of CWFIT, including teaching students behavioral skills, such as getting the teacher's attention appropriately, following directions, ignoring inappropriate peer behavior, and showing respect. Playing the CWFIT game, where teachers observe and score student behavior, teachers praise students who are following the rules, providing additional targeted supports for students who need extra assistance, and the report also describes typical training and support for teachers. In terms of costs, in all the studies included in the intervention report, teachers were trained using materials available for free on the CWFIT developer's website or provided by the study authors. In 6 of the studies, teachers received additional coaching. Districts can purchase training packages for coaches starting at $6,000 to train 2 district coaches who can in turn support 20 teachers. We identified 30 studies of CWFIT in our literature search. 8 of those studies met WWC standards and contributed to the intervention report and effectiveness ratings. This includes 2 group design studies and 6 single case design studies for which we could calculate a design comparable effect size. There were 6 other single case design studies that did not contribute to the synthesized effect we present because we could not calculate a design comparable effect size for any of the findings in these studies. 5 studies did not have at least 3 cases, which is required to calculate a design comparable effect size. 1 study reported a class-level outcome based on small groups of students. Even though the WWC could not calculate a design comparable effect size for these 6 studies, we included the author's visual analysis of the findings in an appendix to the intervention report. These findings are not included in the main intervention report. There were also 11 studies that did not meet standards and 5 studies that were either ineligible to review or out of scope for the review. Across the 8 studies that met WWC standards and contributed to effectiveness ratings, we can report that there were 759 students from several states across the United States. Most of the students were male. We were not able to report a race category for 44% of students. However, we can report that 37% of students were described as white, 18% were Black, and 1% were Pacific Islanders. 67% of students received free or reduced price lunch, and more than 20% received special education services. In terms of the findings, similar to Good Behavior Game, CWFIT had positive effects on outcomes in the student behavioral domain. The research provided strong evidence that CWFIT improved student behavior based on 6 studies and almost 700 students. This outcome domain received an evidence Tier 1 tag. The teacher practice domain also had positive effects. The research provided promising evidence that CWFIT improved teacher practice outcomes based on 5 studies and 321 teachers. This domain received the Evidence Tier 3 tag because it included data from less than 350 teachers. An appendix provides additional characteristics of the single case design studies that meet WWC single case design standards, including additional information about the 6 single case design studies that did contribute to findings and 6 studies that did not contribute to findings. Similar to the Good Behavior Game report, the appendix describes the study and sample characteristics and authors' characterizations of findings in all the single case design studies. This slide includes some key takeaways from today's webinar. Single case designs are experimental designs that can be used with small sample sizes and do not require withholding the intervention from a comparison group. Single case designs can demonstrate causal effects if researchers control the introduction and withdrawal of the intervention and use repeated measures to monitor outcomes both in the presence and absence of the intervention. The Works Clearinghouse provides standards to evaluate the rigor of single case designs and guidelines for synthesizing single case design findings with findings from group design studies. The Good Behavior Game and CW Fit intervention reports include both group design and single case design findings to describe intervention effects. This slide shows where you can access the Good Behavior Game and CW Fit intervention reports. We'd also like to remind you that we used version 4.1 of the standards and procedures to conduct these reviews. We'd also like the audience to be aware that version 5.0 of the Works Clearinghouse standards are now available.
Thank you so much for listening to our webinar. If you have any questions about the Works Clearinghouse, the intervention reports we talked about today, or any other WWC questions, you can contact the WWC Help Desk, or you can email us at the address shown here. Thanks again.